I'd say every about 3 days, we get some form of the war is over, the war is almost over, the other side has capitulated, everything looks good. In between, doggone it, I'm going to have to nuke the world. They play us with a narrative to make themselves look tough like they're doing something. A blockade is a word. In the real world, it's not a blockade. Are you really going to stop Chinese and Russian vessels and risk World War III? We know good and damn well if that price goes up to $6 a gallon here in the United States, we're fried. This unipolar hegemonic aspiration is a narrative. We're extremely powerful militarily, economically, we can force people to our will. This severely deteriorates the strength of that narrative. You're a country in the Middle East and the US says we're going to rebuild our base. Of what value is that? You're going to see a narrative, I think, worldwide where countries are going to start straying away from the US orbit into more powerful orbits. We got to have some protection from somewhere. This works for us. We're doing this.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel we have Garland Nixon, who is a veteran journalist, a political analyst, and the host of the Garland Nixon Show here on YouTube. And he's approaching 100,000 subscribers, so let's help him get over that hurdle. Known for his scathing critiques of U.S. foreign policy and legacy media narratives, he brings a perspective shaped by years in radio activism, even an extensive career in law enforcement. Today, I hope to get your thoughts, Garland, on the developments in Iran, and maybe if we have time to talk a little bit about Russia. So, of course, the table got flipped today once again, and I want to know your thoughts on the status of this supposed peace deal that's in the works. Apparently, there's a 3-page memorandum of understanding. 3 pages. It seems a little light. But, what are your thoughts on Donald Trump coming out this morning and saying that the Strait of Hormuz is open and everything's going to be fine? The stars are all aligning. The markets are pumping. Do you think this is the end of something, or is this just another setup for more perfidy?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I find the 3 pages... the 3 pages must be like that's their set number of pages. I'll tell you why. If you remember during the 2008 bailouts, they gave away like $1 trillion to the banks. It was a 3-page document. So I'm like, that's what it is. 3 pages. They must be like, hey, you can't pass 3 pages to do it. You can do anything. You can give away $1 trillion. You can stop or start a war. You just need 3 pages. We'll have to keep that in mind. So we'll look out for 3-page documents in the future. That'll be an indication that something big is going down. At any rate, I'll say this. One of the things that I think, I'll put it like this, when Trump came in kind of early in his second administration, something happened that kind of colored the way I kind of evaluate Trump. And that was, he was like, yes, Zelensky is a dictator. He said that, right? And then a couple days later, a person from some news person said, hey, so you said Zelensky's a dictator? And Trump said, yeah, I don't remember saying that, right? And I'm like, And I'm like, well, you can't corner this guy. Because if he says something, he'll just like a couple days later say, I don't remember saying it, right? And here's what I learned. Ignore what Donald Trump says. You can look at the context through his history, the old you are what your record says you are kind of thing. So you look at what he's done. You look at what he's doing. But when he does the usual Truth Social post that says, all is wonderful, we've won the war, the other side has capitulated, I'd say every about 3 days for the last month, we get some form of the war is over, the war is almost over, the other side has capitulated, everything looks good. In between, doggone it, I'm going to have to nuke the world and go. So, you get those emotional extremes if you follow Trump. So really, all we can really do is look at what's going on and try to use a context of reality. And the reality has to be colored by 2 questions here. And that is, number one, Is the United States, are we looking at a tail wags the dog, whereas Israel is a rogue country and it kind of drags the United States around by the ear and does whatever it wants, and the United States says, oh, please don't do this, and the Israelis say, I'll do what we want. Is it a rogue actor that's out of control, a mad dog, and the United States is trying to control the mad dog, or is it a guard dog, a trained guard dog? That gives plausible deniability. That the United States says, do this, do this. Oh, by the way, our job. Sure, we're going to do it. And the U.S. says, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. I'll make an argument for the second. And that question is critical in how we determine what's going on in the Middle East. I'll give you an example that leads me towards the latter interpretation of things. Very early after October 7th and Israel started bombing Gaza. And the first hospital, this hospital blows up. And Israel at first says, nah, Hamas did it. And then finally said, okay, we did it. And there was a lot of pushback and people were like, well, this is terrible. You bombed the hospital. And Tony Blinken was asked, on camera. And he said, yeah, that was bad. They shouldn't have done that. That's terrible. And the Israelis came out and said, wait a minute. We ran every target by Tony Blinken. He sat in the office in the room with us and he approved every target. So Blinken was doing I can't believe they did, that's not good. And they came out and spilled the beans. He was sitting in a room and he approved it. And at that point, I'm like, I don't think that's the only time that that's happened. You know what I mean? I can't believe that happened one time. It leads me to believe that there is somewhat of a game going on where you get, hey, we can't control the Israelis. They're doing X, but really behind the scenes, you're saying to the Israelis, continue to do X. Right now, so that's part of the discussion that we have to try to understand if we're going to unpack what's going on here. The other part is this. Look, it's supposedly about Iran. Well, excuse me. It's about Iran getting nukes, but no, it's about Iran killing protesters. No, wait a minute. It's about Iran having ballistic missiles. And I've always had this saying, my background in law enforcement, interview and interrogation, right? If you ask somebody something and they give you three different answers, none of them are it. Or every time. Yeah. Why'd you do that? Because my feet hurt. Are you sure? I mean, because my arm hurt. Are you sure? Because my sister wouldn't give me a ride. They're all lies. Ain't nobody going to give you complete different answers for anything, which means it has nothing to do with either of those three. Zero to do with either of those three.
So now, what do you think the reason is? The
reason, I believe, okay, if we follow a logical chain, the United States tells you the reason. What do they say? The big kahuna, the big issue, everything, it's all about China. They'll tell you it's all about China. I believe them. So what happens? We're going to take Venezuela out first. Why? Well, they got oil going to China. We'll still allow oil to go to China now, but when we're ready, we can cut it off. So we get Venezuela, oil to China, we got to stop that. Iran, like 90% of their oil is sold to China. We take over Iran. We take the oil going to China. We cut that off. Then we control the Straits of Hormuz. And we can cut off oil going to China. The U.S. has realized something. There is no prayer of the United States militarily confronting China. We're getting our butts kicked by Iran. The idea that we could fight China, that we could go 7,000 miles an hour with this military and fight China, it would be vaporized with conventional missiles in an hour. So in realizing that, they haven't given up. They said, okay, that ain't going to work. Here's what we'll do. We'll go out, we'll find out where they get their fuel, all their fuel, we'll cut their fuel off, and then we can twist their arms and make them do what we want. That's what it appears to me to be. That being said, then it isn't, in fact, again, about nuclear weapons, because they already have said repeatedly everything. Not only has Iran said they don't want nuclear weapons, since 2008, the United States intelligence agencies report have said there is no evidence that they have a military program, a nuclear program. So even our intelligence agencies say they don't. So then what's it about? Is it about ballistic missiles? Well, that's only about, okay, you can't hit Israel and they can hit you. Is it about they're killing protesters? Yeah, we shot a friggin' guy who legally was carrying a firing gun, a legal firing arm. And the government's like, hey, he's got a legal firearm. Pow, we're going to shoot him. Is it really about? No. So I think we have to take into context this plan to contain China, as absurd as it is. And through that lens, then the U.S. certainly can't just give up and say we lost. They have to say, what's our next move? How do we find another way to execute the same program? Now, is it an accident at the same time? There's missiles going in and drones going into Russia, hitting their what? Hitting their hydrocarbons, hitting their oil things. He said every move you see the U.S. make is to go after oil installations. In Russia, Venezuela, China, that's what we call a pattern, my friend. And it's obvious that that's what it's about. So even if they've taken, shall we say, a bit of a bloody nose here, and they may have to fall back and regroup a little bit, maybe. I'm not sure they're not going to reattack tonight because it is Friday, and that's when they make all of their money betting on the next attack. Isn't that a nice little game? You decide what time you were going to attack, and all of your insider buddies go in and bet on what time you're going to attack. That's an old scam. So anyway, that's my thoughts. That's where we are.
So if somebody's going to initiate hostilities again, it's going to be the United States. And based on the details of what we know so far, there's mixed reports coming out, but they've agreed apparently to open the Strait of Hormuz, whatever that means. However, it's uncertain as to whether or not they're going to be charging tolls. And the U.S. blockade is still actually being enforced, allegedly. So now the Iranians have come out and said, and we don't know, what sort of back-channel negotiation and face saving is happening. So we always have to take everything that's said with a grain of salt in terms of what the messaging delivered to the public. But now the Iranians are allegedly saying if the U.S. doesn't lift the blockade, then the Strait of Hormuz will be closed again. So do you have any thoughts on those terms?
A couple of things. Number one, I have heard through people who I think are kind of got some good insider information that the U.S. communicated through Pakistan to Iran. There's no real blockade. This is for internal political, domestic politics.
I heard that as well.
You heard that also? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that there was a video that was circulating that apparently was some Pakistani diplomat or. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've heard it also from some though you see those kind of things, you don't know how true an AI they are. But I was also told that by a person who's fairly close to international policy pretty well. So,
I mean, we do know that we have seen many vessels on Marine Tracker be turned around at the same time. So it's kind of.
Well, here's the thing about it. The reality, when you talk to operations people, the blockade is a word. What does the blockade look like? How many ships would it actually take? I mean, there's hundreds of ships going in and out. How many ships would it take us to? What could we do? We could randomly stop one every now and then. But over and all, what percentage of the ships going in and out could 3 or 4 Navy vessels stop? I mean, for instance, like from like the widest 2 areas where you would have to go for the so-called blade would take a ship like a day or a day and a half. So if somebody says, hey, there's a ship going through, go get it. All right, I'll be there in a day and a half. It'll be off the coast of Bangladesh by the time you get there. So the reality is we don't actually have the physical capacity to do a blockade. You know what I mean? Like you're going to blockade 95, Highway 95, where there's 10,000 cars going through a day with, I don't know, 1 or 2 police cruisers. Ain't going to happen. So the reality of this so-called blockade is the U.S. has the capacity to randomly stop an occasional ship. But in the real world, it's not a blockade. It's a symbolic blockade. But practically speaking, it's not. And are you really going to stop Chinese and Russian vessels and risk World War III? Then are you going to stop Indian vessels? Are you going to stop French and Japanese vessels? Are you really going to stop your out? You know what I mean? When you look at it, it's like they ain't really going to do a blockade and they can't do a blockade. So what is the blockade about? It's about strong rhetoric. I doubt myself that the Iranians, if they make a deal, would give that deal up for the narrative of a blockade that appears, that here a lot of people believe it's a blockade, that's for sure. But I don't think a lot of places around the world people see this as a blockade.
Yeah, I mean, the pushback to that would be that a lot of the power of the blockade is in the psychological aspect. Mm-hmm. So if you're a ship and you hear CENTCOM come on the radio and say, hey, we're going to use force on your ship. I mean, between the insurance companies and between the captain on the ship themselves, most people are probably going to comply with that order, don't you think?
Depends on what country they're from, for starters. If they're from China or Russia, they sure as heck ain't now, are they? They ain't going to listen to you for 1 second. I tell you what it will do. It'll raise the cost of insurance. But I mean, and then, okay, we're going to come get you. You crank up your radar to 250 miles. There ain't a ship within 250 miles of me. Okay, yeah, you're en route. By the time you get to this spot where I am, I'll be in the Maldives, pal. Come on, come get me. You'll never catch me. So there's the idea. You got to understand the size of the ocean in that area we're looking at. It's not like you can call a ship and say stop, and if they don't, you just saunter on over to them. They're literally a day and a half away. They're literally 1,000 kilometers away. So even the capacity to do that, and there's 50 other ships going. Which one are you going to choose? So I look at the actual operational, the capacity to do this blockade in the physical world. I just don't see how it exists. So I see it more as rhetoric than anything else, because we don't have the ability to control, the high seas. This is not the Spanish Armada of, 15 something or other.
Contrary to popular belief, in the apocalypse, most people aren't going to die by the hands of marauders. In fact, you're probably going to die from disease. This is why you need antibiotics. The problem is, getting them requires a prescription. Well, today's sponsor is Jace Medical. They've created a revolutionary service that allows you to get prescription medications like antibiotics with relative ease, hassle-free. This will be worth more than gold in an emergency for somebody who needs them. So do yourself a favor and take your prepping to the next level while you still can. Check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video. Like you use the example of a traffic jam. We're going to block the interstate with one cop car. I mean, that can happen because there's a reason why there's not a 1-to-1 ratio between cops and civilians, right? I mean, because people assume that, well, they're coordinated, they're organized, and the people are not. So the other ships are not. So the advantage that the U.S. has in this situation is that they don't have to be kinetically within range, so long as the other person, as long as there's a plausible, deniability, then they're potentially under threat, which might be a sufficient deterrent. And so this is where I don't necessarily agree with the argument that they can't impose a blockade, because I think the brunt of it is psychological. And it's true that, I've said that the U.S. is going to impose a blockade for months, and that one of the problems that would arise would be one of China's vessels going through there, and that potentially being a major international incident. But we've also seen a lot of Russian Shadow Fleet vessels boarded by U.S. forces recently, and apparently the Russian warships were within range of one of those events, supposedly. So it seems as though they have a pretty high tolerance for what they're willing to take. And again, Iran, China, Russia are always counterpunching. They're never initiating. And, it's funny because Putin always says, if you know a fight's coming, you throw the first punch. But yeah, I'm not so sure I'm convinced that imposing a blockade is an impossibility for those reasons. But yeah.
One other thing I'd like to add. The other thing is this, and that is, when we interpret this, we know that there's back channels discussions, but we don't know what they are that have a significant. For instance, I will guarantee you that the U.S. diplomats or people, back channel people, have talked with India, have talked with Russia, have talked with Japan, have talked with China about this. There's no question they have, and let me give you an example. When Trump came in the second time, he was saying something about India. We're going to sanction you if you buy Russian oil. And the Indians said, wait a minute. They said, you're buying Russian oil. And they said, wait a minute. The Biden administration publicly said, we're going to sanction the Indians. You better not buy Russian oil. And then they contacted us and said, ignore that. Buy all the Russian oil you can, because we need to keep the price down on the market. Right? Okay. So when in the media sphere, people were talking about the sanctioning of Indian oil and whether Indians going to buy. In the back, we were like, hey, man, keep that oil flowing, bro. We got to keep the price down, right? There's that side of it, too. There's the side of it that they play us with a narrative to make themselves look tough like they're doing something. But in reality, the other side of it is, yeah, but we know good and damn well if that price goes up to $6 a gallon here in the United States, we're fried. So that's the other side of it too, that you never know how much of that is going on, but you know it's always going on. You just never know how much. And I think that has to be taken into context.
I would agree that there must be some kind of coordinated public messaging campaign that is happening. You know, you guys can say this and we'll say this, and, you know, we can all save face. It seems a little bit too good to be true, though, to say that we've come from threatening Iran's total destruction to suddenly we have a deal and, you know, the sun's coming out and, you know, everything's going to be just fine. And now we're back to basically square one where we were before the war. Only now Iran is charging tolls on the Strait of Hormuz. You know, a part of me just thinks, yeah, I don't think this is over, especially when you look at the fact that they're still sending a lot of military equipment into the region, which, you know, I mean, they're always kind of doing that in that region, but slightly above average right now. What do you think the likelihood that this is just another deception tactic?
Well, the safe bet is always consistency, right? So that's what they've done over and over again. You would have to suspect this is what they're doing again. So yes, I think those who say, well, they're just kind of deceived and then they're going to ready to go back to war. It's a reasonable assumption to make. Okay. It is reasonable to think they're going to do the same thing that they've done in the past over and over again. There is another context. There is another issue that has to be taken into account, I think. And that is, okay, so yes, they want to do regime change in Iran, and they ain't going to just give up that easy. And they usually gear up and try to punch you a second time. True. The other thing that has to be looked at is the U.S. is really low. We've got a finite amount of ammo. And when you listen to the experts, they say, man, we're running short, number one. Number two, we can't fight a long, drawn out battle because we're running out of stuff. And in a couple months, we'll be at everything. Everything. That this will completely demilitarize the U.S. And is the U.S. willing to go into this thing knowing that they may be demilitarized? Now, the argument is that wouldn't be rational. But the argument is, well, it wasn't rational to attack them in the first place. So why would you expect them to wake up and start being rational now? So I think, yes, it's safe to assume or guess that they're probably going to attack again. The only mitigating factor is the fear of severe inflation and deflation, stagflation at home, and the political instability that will create, the fear of running out of weapons, the fact that Iran has been very successful in their military endeavors, and you know you're going to take some punches, and you don't know if they're loading up with some new stuff to hit you with. You really want to go back into this fight and get your nose bloodied again? We lost 17 aircraft in the last 10 days. Yeah, do you really want to go back and start swinging in that fight again? You got to think about it. So, yeah, there are reasons to suspect they may not be ready to fight right now. And to me, all that would mean would be this. No, they ain't going to do it right now. They'll gear up for it in another 6 to 12 months. You know, if they don't do it right now, and the Iranians know, and the Iranians say, how you keep doing it's coming back. We're trying to get to the root causes so you don't come back in 6 to 12 months, which is what you do every single time. So it's a complicated circumstance, but either way, it's just a matter of time. Are they planning on coming back today? Or are they planning on coming back September 23rd or something? But they're planning on coming back.
It seems like Trump's words have failed to elicit a lot of the market movements that they did when this thing started. So the deeper we go into this, the bigger and grander the lie and more convincing it has to be, it seems. And so I actually get concerned when, you know, Trump makes these very big claims and we make these big breakthroughs, even though it appears as though nothing has fundamentally changed on the ground. The blockade is still in place. Apparently, they're still charging tolls through the strait. So they have to keep upping the ante in terms of the promises. And this is something we should expect. Like you're saying, I think they are reloading because the original MO of this whole thing was to be a proxy war against China in a way. And I don't think they've achieved that goal. And so somehow, some way, they have to reinitiate hostilities or keep the pressure on. But of course, now that the markets have been subdued once again, there's a good chance that they're going to seize on that opportunity to, do whatever they have to do this weekend.
I think you're right. I think you're right. You're right. I think one of the issues too with restarting this war is, and you bring up a good point. In the first couple weeks, Trump would say something way up here, and the markets would go berserk. Then he'd say something down here, and the markets go berserk. And then after a while, you notice no matter what Trump said, the markets just kind of eased along. And the speculators were like, well, we're not going to really listen to his latest proclamation. We'll wait and see what happens. And it got to the point, I think we're at a point now where the markets, the speculators in the market only really react to something physical that they can see. They're no longer reacting to the rhetoric because the rhetoric is, outlandish in one direction or the other. And they're like, we've been bouncing back and forth. Let's wait and see what happens. In the event that the war starts back up, let's say the U.S., how the U.S. does, everything is shock and awe. They only got one move. Let's hit them as hard as we can with everything we got, and then they'll capitulate. They've never learned that that's not going to work, but that's the only move they got, right? So they come out Friday and they say, we're going to hit them harder than ever with 100 million targets will be hit, and then Saturday morning they'll call and they'll capitulate. But I think if it starts back up and then Iran's going to say, all right, well, we'll hit you with X amount of missiles a day for the next 8 months, because we fight a little different than that, right? Okay. If that happens, I think the markets will react very significantly to that, because where the markets are now, the speculators are like, we got a chance. We don't have to really freak out. Maybe it looks like maybe a deal, possibly something's going in the right direction. We do have a ceasefire. And, as diplomats will tell you, when you get a ceasefire, the idea when you get a ceasefire is to work on extending the ceasefire. As soon as you get a 10-day ceasefire, and then you try to turn that into a 45-day ceasefire, it gives you enough time. You can't really resolve anything in 10. You want to get a 45 now. Now you got time to really work, right? So it's like, okay, let's see if they get the 30 or 45-day ceasefire, and then the markets will react again to that, because that's something tangible. That's something real. I think if they come back and they do the old shock and awe on a Friday night, and of course, over the weekend, Iran's going to throw missiles and drones back, and we're back where we were before. I think the market speculators will then look at it and say, yeah, there ain't no chance of this ending anytime soon. They'll physically look at it, and then you'll see that major reaction in the market that everybody was waiting to see. Is it going to happen? You'll see some very serious drops. You'll see some very serious changes in oil and commodity prices. You'll see that big bounce that everyone feared if they go back to fighting, because it'll be like, okay, we've lost all hope. They did their ceasefire thing. They didn't get nothing. This thing's going on until next year. And we're going to have economic catastrophe starting Monday. So that would be something real. And I think you really hit a good point when you said the markets have been subdued, because that's the point. They're waiting to see what happens, not hear what happens.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the veracity of this statement by Trump? Allegedly, he told Bloomberg that Iran has agreed to indefinitely suspend its nuclear program and will not receive any frozen U.S. funds in exchange. Do you think that is just more back-channel face saving?
Well, but now, understanding that that's all that Trump does. He makes these outlandish proclamations. I won. We won. They lost. This is the greatest win ever. They've capitulated. They've dropped to their knees, and they've decided they're no longer praying to Allah. They're praying to me. You know what I mean? I mean, the things that Trump says are so over the top and so outlandish that whatever he says, you have to assume that it's outlandish and over the top. And usually what happens, he says something like, the Indians said they're going to do this. And the Indians are like, what is he talking about? We never talked to this guy. Yeah, literally, they're like, we didn't have that what the hell? Yeah. Right? So at this point, again, this is a narrative, which is a sad state of affairs, because, the Biden administration, all they lived off was narratives. And you were like, my God, that makes me sick. Come on, live in a real world. And now Trump has gotten to the point where he's in the same place the Biden people were, which is, here's a narrative for you. I'm not going to worry about the real world. So that narrative says he's won, they've capitulated. But I think 4 days in, we heard that he won and they capitulated 4 days in. And we heard it every 4 days for the last month. So why should today be any different? Every day we'll get some kind of a tweet or true social proclamation that they've capitulated, they've given everything up, and he's completely won. And it's Trump.
Do you think if Iran does agree to suspend or throttle their enrichment, that that would be a concession and an admission of defeat in some way? Because they've given up a lot of leverage here by going along with this charade in terms of the price of oil. That was kind of their, the gun that they were holding to the head of the global economy. Do you think if they do actually relinquish control of this highly enriched uranium and they agree to suspend nuclear enrichment for an extended period of time, won't that be viewed as a concession of defeat?
Well, here's my thoughts on this. So I got to give you my thoughts on the whole nuclear enrichment thing. Starting in 2008, in fact, George Bush wrote in his memoirs that he couldn't attack Iran after the intelligence community released a report that said Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program, right? They have not weaponized their nuclear program, right? And pretty much every year since, the intelligence agency says, including last year, they write something that says, hey, they don't have a nuclear weapons program. And in fact, Donald Trump was asked that. Donald Trump was asked, well, why are you saying that they have a nuclear weapons program, and we just got a report from Tulsi Gabbard a few weeks ago that says they don't have one? And Trump's answer, I don't care what she says. In other words, yeah, okay, that's reality. You don't expect me to deal with reality, for God's sake. I've got a narrative here I'm trying to live in. And so it's easy, first of all. Let me tell you something. If you're bargaining with me and you say, well, Garland, first of all, you've got to give up your nuclear weapons program, I'd say, what do I get for it? I don't have one. It's easy for me to bargain something away that I don't have. That your intelligence agency has said that I don't have it. I'd be happy to bargain that away and give it up. That's the easiest thing in the world. That's gravy, number one. Number two, what happened? They, under the NPT, nuclear NPT, but the nuclear proliferation program treaty, they're allowed to, I think it's up to 3.67% or something like that. Yeah. Okay, when the U.S. backed out of the JCPOA, they enriched up to 60%, and the reason was to put a knife to our throat, to say, oh, yeah, well, we'll fix you, to try to force us back in, but we wouldn't do it. And then we said, well, they're only doing it because they want a weapon. They really did it to try to force. It was a tactical move. It didn't work. And I think it didn't work because it was never about the nuclear program anyway, and they know it, and I know it. It was about regime change.
Wasn't that a bad play then on Iran's behalf to kind of posture as a nuclear threshold state? Because, of course, it doesn't take that long to get from 60% to 90%. There were a lot of Iranian nuclear scientists and various officials in the Iranian government prior to this saying, well, we could make a nuclear weapon within weeks if we wanted to, but we're choosing not to. Wasn't that like an unnecessary taunt? And if they were to relinquish control of that nuclear material, was this just all for nothing then?
I don't think it mattered in this context, because then we literally fomented protest and then said it was because of protests. Right. So, okay, yeah, we're going to do something about the nuclear program. Oh, that ain't working. All right, here's what we're going to do. Get the CIA and Mossad and get some protests going. Now it's about protest. It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, yes, you could make an argument that had it been about nuclear weapons programs, you would be right. It would be it's a tactical move, a strategic move, but it wouldn't have been a good one if it was about that. But since it wasn't, it was irrelevant because we just cooked up another story because it was we want a regime change, Iran, and doggone it, we're going to come up with a reason, and you ain't going to stop us. We'll come up with another reason. So you're right, except they were lying the whole time. So you're wrong. Because as they proved by cooking up another story that was equally as absurd. In fact, what did we do?
Dropped, by the way. They don't talk about that at all.
Yeah, in fact, Scott Besson came and said, we made a move to destroy their currency and throw them into an economic tailspin. And then we financed and armed protesters and said, hey, it's valid for them to protest because they're in an economic tailspin. We created the economic tailspin. Then we armed the protesters and said they were perfectly reasonable for them to protest because there was an economic tailspin that we created. And then we said, yeah, and we got to protect the protesters. You want to talk about cooking up a pack of lies? You can't you're really going deep down the rabbit hole there. In other words, this was the game plan all along. I knew it. The Iranians knew it. And maybe in reality, they were just playing along with the game so they could just continue to drag this out as long as they could so they could keep building the missile cities. So when the inevitability did come, they'd have enough drones and missiles to fight back and to do what they've done, to at least minimum fight us to a stalemate enough so that they were delivering enough punishment that the U.S. had to back off.
So the wild card here is Israel. And whether or not they're going to agree to this, they've already stated that their work is not done in Iran. You know, the way you're describing this, it's a U.S. war to maintain unipolarity, to keep the Chinese suppressed. Are they going to unleash the attack dog once again to try to, stir things up? It seems like usually this is when Israel enters the chat and sabotages the whole thing.
Well, either Israel or ISIS. You know what I mean? There's the other ISIS. The ISIS is terrible. They hate us. For some reason, they never attack the United States. They attack Russia. They attack Syria. They attack Iran. They attack everybody we don't like, but they never attack us for some convenient reason. So maybe you unleash ISIS now. That's an attack dog you can use. Or Israel, you pretend that you can't control them again. So I think but the U.S. may be right now, to be frank, they're in a bit of a corner that we're not usually in. And I think the corner that's different now, I don't know whether it makes a difference or not, is the fear that gas prices are going to go through the roof. Because really, the only thing that the political class and the powerful class only thing they really ever fear is internal uprising. The only thing they really fear is that people at home will get to the point where they've had enough. You know what I mean? And so there may be some fear like, man, they're getting really pissed off about these gas prices. I mean, hey, man, I'm a regular old guy. I got a pickup truck. I got a diesel pickup truck, man, a Ford F-250. I have a regular car, but I love my truck. I ain't happy filling that damn truck up right now. And there's a lot of people like me,
The first mistake that probably 50% of people make when they get into prepping is they run out and they find the cheapest, biggest bucket of so-called emergency food that money can buy. The problem is it usually tastes awful. And I know what you're thinking, Nate, in a disaster situation, I'm gonna rise to the occasion. My palate is formidable. No, it's not. You're not built like that. You're a first worlder just like me. There's a much better solution that your family's gonna love you for. Let's check it out. Would you like some chocolate cake that will last 25 years? How about some vegetables or some shredded beef or hundreds of other varieties? Go through the link in the description below and get 15% off the #1 freeze-dried food company in America, the only one that I 100% resolutely endorse, Wholesale Freeze-Dried Foods. Use the coupon code in the description for 15% off. Well, it's interesting because Trump said that one of his intelligence analysts or somebody had told him that prior to this that oil could go up to $300 a barrel, and he pulled the trigger anyways. He was bragging about this, how he gambled, and it seems like he's ostracized a lot of his swing supporters with the Owens and the Alex Jones and all those people who he kind of threw under the bus the other day. It seems like he's not too concerned about expending political capital at this point in time, because of course he is ultimately a lame duck president. He might be concerned about the next incumbent, who that might be, whether it's JD Vance, but it seems like they're kind of throwing caution to the wind and they don't really care. And the base that they've retained will believe anything. He could do anything. The price could go up to $10 and they would still praise him as, being this 40 chess master, strategic thinker. And it seems like he's kind of counting on that. So I don't know if, $6 a gallon gas prices would do it, because it would piss off a lot of people, but he would still have that foundation, right?
Well, I think there's two things we're talking about here. The traditional political ramifications, like they won't vote for you and your numbers will go down and they'll be really pissed and you'll lose in the midterms, And one thing's obvious, they don't give a crap about that. Which group of puppets, the Democrat puppets or the Republic, which group of puppets get in, they don't care. because either way, they win. So that's one thing. Do they really care what the people who have power really care if we revolt against the Republicans and the Democrats went? Oh, of course not. But the other part of it is, what do they fear? Political instability. It's very different. Here's the difference thing. When people say, I'm so angry with the Republicans, I'm going to the Democrats. I'm so angry with the Democrats, I'm going to the Republicans. Well, they love that because they own both parties. But if you start to get political instability, to me, that's when people start saying, I don't trust the system anymore. I don't respect the traditional institutions anymore. There's the potential for violent acts by people. There's the potential for people pushing back against the entire institution of politics, and things can get out of their control. So that's what we're talking about. The difference between people jumping ping-ponging from one party to the next, to the people giving up on the institutions, and now they're not going to conduct themselves in the normal political way and accepting the things. And like I said, then there's a potential for violence, for people freaking out, for people burning things down. Any kind of thing can happen then. I think that is a fear that they have. But they don't care about us winning or losing, which puppet we choose. You know what I mean? The old saying is, what was that? Well, a guy once said, the Democrats and the Republicans are like, you're sitting in a restaurant ordering, and you got two different waiters, but the food's cooked in the same kitchen. Yeah. Whatever you order, you got one menu and it's all cooked by the same guy. You just choose which waitress you want to serve it to you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that dimension of it. I mean, whether it's Democrat or Republican, foreign policy doesn't change much. I mean, you've seen what happened in Syria, which was leading up to this, and that happened under Biden's watch. So obviously, there's a continuity of agenda happening regardless of who's in control. I'm a little bit worried that the population's tolerance for these sort of things is much higher than we would like, and I think things could get a lot worse before they're forced to kind of take their foot off the gas. Now, we did see, around that $120 oil mark, there would always be some kind of backpedaling, and it seemed like that was a certain threshold that once they got to, they changed the messaging just to kind of calm people down a little bit. So maybe that was the red line. Maybe that's as far as this goes. Hopefully that's the case and this holds. If this does hold, how do you think this changes the nature of the Middle East afterwards, presuming that this all ends and the Iranian leadership can freely maneuver around and travel without fear of decapitation?
I think that it changes a dynamic that's bigger than just the Middle East, right? Because, I refer to the U.S. as an empire. A lot of people do. Some people argue about the details, but like some people use words like globalism, and other people use neoliberal, and other people use it. So we're kind of all referring to the same thing. We just kind of have different ways of referencing it, right? And so this, unipolar hegemonic aspiration, we want to run the world, is a narrative. The narrative is we're extremely powerful militarily, we're extremely powerful economically, where we can force people to do to our will, right? That is a narrative of empire, of power, of strength, right? Of domination. This severely deteriorates the strength of that narrative, right? So now you start calling people, saying, you better do this. And people are like, well, I don't think he could force me to do it. And, here's the other part. There are a lot of countries, take the Gulf countries, these small little statelets like Bahrain or whatever, right? It's like this. If you're accustomed to being a slave, even when you're free, you look for a new master, right? So what happened? Because slavery and those kind of things are a mentality, right? And I think these countries, they're getting the crap bombed out of them, and they're asking themselves, is it worth our while to have a base here? The United States can't even protect themselves, so I know they can't protect us. I think these countries now say, we've been under the umbrella of the U.S. to protect us, and it ain't working. But they're accustomed to being under the umbrella of someone else. So I think they're more likely to call the Russias and Chinas of the world and say, hey, man, can we be friends? Because they feel like they want somebody to to protect them. And I've done a lot of traveling and gone a lot of places that people haven't gone, and talked to a lot of people, and been very fortunate. And one of the places that I went was Minsk in Belarus. And I was able to went on was interviewed on their major TV channel, and talked to different people and diplomats and different regular people. And here's what was interesting about Belarus. And I never thought about that until I started going to some smaller countries. Belarus has kind of attached itself to Russia, and it's a sister state of Russia. And I said, tell me, what do you guys think of that? And they said, look, they said, Belarus, I didn't know this. Belo means white. It means white Russia, right? It's a long old word from a lot. Okay. The Belarusians, they said, look, culture is different from Russians. We're fine with the Russians. We don't love them. We don't hate them. We live next door to them. We're fine. Whatever. Mm-hmm. They said, but during World War II, 1 out of every 3 Belarusians was killed by the Nazis. And I was like, crap, I didn't know that. Yeah, on their way through, they weren't kind. You know what I mean? As they were in many places, right? Okay. And they said, look, here's the deal. We're a small country. And if some major country wants to kick the crap out of us, we're not able to protect ourselves. Russia's next to us. It's a nuclear power. It's a powerful country. We shake hands with it. We'll sell you stuff. You'll buy stuff with us. We're beside a major power. Our economy's strong. We're doing business with them all the time. And they put a bunch of troops here, so nobody's going to attack us. So it's a nice marriage of convenience, right? So what I came to realize something. Look, if you're a small country and there's powerful players around, you're going to think like that. You know what I mean? You're going to think. I once heard a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying. I heard a guy talk about, he says, let me tell you something about women, Garland. I said, okay, I don't know where he got it from, probably off the internet. But he said, look, women want a tough guy. And I'm like, why? He says, look, there's some real monsters out there. And women want a guy that's nice enough to say that he's going to treat him good. But they want enough of a monster that he can protect them from the real monsters out there. So when some other guy's threatening them, they want a monster. They want a guy that's going to say, I'll kick your ass if you so much as breathe it, my woman, right? But that's a concept of security, a human concept of security, right? So I'm a woman and I'm small. Okay, and these guys are big. I need to have somebody that can grant me a certain amount of security. So while I may say to the Gulf countries, you're out here looking for a big, powerful buddy. In reality, you got to take it from their perspective. I'm a small country and I'm not that powerful. Somebody could just come in and overthrow my country, do whatever. And if I look at the U.S. and said, the U.S. can't do it, Russia and China is pretty powerful. Maybe they can. I'm going to try an alliance with it. My point being, I suspect that's going to happen around the world, that a lot of countries are going to look at the U.S. and say, yeah, when you guys got tangled up with somebody that could shoot back, things didn't work out real well for you. We think we'll call a bigger friend over here. So you're going to see a narrative, I think, worldwide where the United States is not able to bring countries together behind it to do whatever it wants, where countries are going to start straying away from the U.S. orbit into more powerful orbits. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's the nature of a smaller country to want security and to say, I'm going to ally myself with somebody powerful because that's the only way I can really ensure that nobody's going to take me out. That's reality, whether whatever you think about it.
Yeah, that strategic vassalage makes sense because, of course, what other choice do you have, right? So the United States could not protect the Gulf states from Iranian missile attacks. And it seemed like the Iranians were primarily targeting the Gulf states more so than Israel, even. And in fact, in some of the recent ultimatums, they were saying that they didn't even mention Israel as being one of the targets. Professor Morandi has been tweeting a lot and not even really addressing Israel because they're, of course, protected by multi-layered air defense systems, even though a lot of missiles are getting through there with the stars and but still more protected than the highly vulnerable Gulf states. So a lot of these countries are going to be reassessing hosting these U.S. bases, if it's even really an option, because there's an occupation component to this as well. Do you think that the U.S. is going to wind down their operations in the Middle East, and is this going to force them to curtail some of their military bases and deployments, or are they going to double down and continue this endless air bridge of manpower and material that's flowing into the region as we speak?
The question is, will they be able to impose their will in the Middle East? Will it be their choice? You know what I mean? Now that they have had such little military success in the Middle East, will they be able to say to these states, we're coming back? Here's the bottom line. Okay, you're a country in the Middle East, and the U.S. says, we're going to rebuild our base. Of what value is that? That base exists by the grace of the Iranians. You put that base back, and the Iranians say, on any given Tuesday, we can turn that base into dust, and you know it, and there's nothing you can do about it. So reality, if we put up bases now, they're nice fat targets for Iranian missiles. So it's not like even if the US rebuilds the base, it's not like there's some great threat to Iran and we can use those to attack Iran. If another war kicks off with Iran, all you can do is run from those bases and abandon them again. So even the concept of the US being able to have some level of occupation in the Middle East, and that occupation would be a threat to Iran. The money would be wasted if we go to a war with Iran again. That's the first thing to realize. The second thing is there are some murmurings in the international discussion about Russia and China talking with the Gulf states about a new security architecture in the Middle East. And I suspect that discussion is going to get louder and louder. As I said, doesn't that kind of look, Russia and China saying the security architecture that you had with the U.S. was one that, with the U.S., alongside the U.S., was one that was adversarial to Iran. Look, you don't necessarily like Iran. They don't necessarily like you. That's life. But we got a good relationship with Iran. And we got a good relationship with you. We buy a lot of stuff from Iran, and they buy a lot of stuff from us. Iran needs us. We need them. We can guarantee you that Iran won't attack you because they need us and we need them. If you're the Gulf states and you're looking for security, all you want is a guarantee that you're not going to get attacked by Iran. You can rebuild your stuff. You can go on. You can make money, right? So I suspect that Russia and China come in with a new security architecture that they're pitching to these new countries. And in the same way, when I talked to Belarus, it was practical. Look, we're right next to Russia. We're a small country. We got 9 million people. We got to have some protection from somewhere. This works for us. We're doing this. Our economy's looking strong. We're going to stay alive. Okay. I suspect these countries, when it comes to some practical end, are going to say, well, all right, I don't like the Iranians. They don't like me. But this guy can guarantee they won't attack me. And the other guy guaranteed that they wouldn't attack me. And they still attacked me. And he couldn't do anything about it. I'm going to try this. So I think that's the direction. I think the United States is going to be struggling to hold on to their traditional alliances because they couldn't come through.
But don't you think people will look at China's lack of overt support for Iran as being a sign of weakness, in that the Chinese foreign ministry denied that they had provided Iran any sort of military equipment or support? And you would think that a show of strength would be to say, no, we are going to support Iran and we're going to send them weapons. And, how could a country confide in another superpower that's unwilling, it seems, to offer that sort of direct support?
I think what we're looking at is China and Russia do things differently. They didn't offer overt support. I think it's pretty obvious that as far as targeting, as far as increasing Iran's ability with their missiles to be accurate, as far as real-time ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, space-based intelligence, it's clear that Russia and China were knee-deep in this thing, clearly. But Russia and China, how they're different countries, and they're the type to say, I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't do anything. We didn't see anything. We don't know anything. Yeah, and I think the world knows Russia and China was involved, and they're just simply going to deny that they did anything. So I think, and add this, if you look at China, they play their cards different. Russia is more of a military power, and Russia's more the guy that'll get in there and mix it up with you a little bit and fight. China's the guy that comes in with the money afterwards. So here's what I expect to happen. Okay, a whole bunch of stuff got blown up in Iran, right? I suspect when this comes in, China's going to come in and rebuild all of it in a month. You know how fast they build like bridges and buildings? I suspect China's part of it is when this is all said and done, they blew up a lot of stuff. We knew they were going to blow up a lot of stuff. We come in, rebuild all of that stuff. Now, what does Russia do? Hydrocarbons, gas fields, oil fields. Russia comes in. Yeah, they blew up some of your stuff. Russia redevelops their gas and their oil, their hydrocarbons. China comes in, rebuilds the things that were blown up. So I think that there's a plan and a place here for the type of assistance that they give them during the war, which is ISR, which is critical, as you know about a war. Intelligence surveillance, that is what makes you win or lose. You know what I mean? Is intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance. Do you have targets? Do you have real time? All these kinds of things. Do you have accuracy? The technological advances is winning or losing a war, right? And afterwards, what happens? Because, here's the thing about it. Peace is, and a lot of people don't talk about this, peace is something that is maintained by, after a war, you got to have economic development, right? You got to rebuild. You got to rebuild things. That's critical. And if you've got an entity ready to come in and say, oh, hey, man, look, we're the Chinese. This is what we do. We're building everything back up. Your people at home are happy. Your people in Iran are like, okay, I think we did good and won the war. Hey, wait a minute. Everything's rebuilt. Wow, it's all good. Hey, excellent. Good job. So I think that's what you're looking at, that they have, what is it? Division of labor here. The term that's used, that there's a division of labor here in this thing. And then the part of it is for, if they can get it stopped, what they do afterwards.
It's an interesting perspective. Just one last question for you, because we're kind of running short on time here. We haven't really talked about Russia at all. Now, they've been getting hit really hard in the last month. Probably, some of the biggest strikes on their oil and gas facilities since the war began have happened since the Iran war started. Why do you think that the Trump administration has not denounced these attacks, especially in light of the fact that they're trying to suppress oil prices? And we recently now hear a lot of rhetoric around the Baltic states and their complicity in providing air cover for these drone attacks, which seem to be increasing by the day. And Russia seemingly has not stalled entirely, but slowed down significantly in their advance on Ukraine. Where do you think that conflict goes if the Iran war is resolved?
A couple of things. Number one, I think the U.S. hasn't denounced it because I think it's part of the U.S. kind of the empire war on. Sergei Lavrov said it recently. He said, look, the U.S. is and its allies, whatever you want to call them, are trying to dominate the oil and gas market worldwide. And so I think you can say it's not an accident that they're blowing up gas fields and oil fields in the Middle East, and they're also blowing them up in Russia, and that so these things are interconnected, number one. Interestingly enough, as you probably know, I've been back and forth to Russia, and I had the opportunity to interview a lot of people there. One of the guys that I interviewed, interestingly enough, is with the Russian government, and his job is that when an oil or gas field is hit by drones or whatever, to deal with rebuilding it. But here's what he said in the interview. He said, look, these gas and oil fields are gigantic. You know what I mean? Thousands of acres. These things are huge. Okay. He said, so when you send a drone in and it hits an area, it's not going to put it out of business, but we got to rebuild it, right? He says, because they're so big, you'd have to friggin' take a nuke to take one of these. They're half the size of a city, right? They're gigantic. You're saying they're gigantic installations. Okay. So he said, but the issue for us is, and this is drone warfare, they send a drone or a missile in that costs X amount of dollars, and it does X amount of dollars worth of damage. So if it costs you $100,000 to make the missile and it costs us $10 million to do the repair, we lose. You know what I mean? And he said, that's the real problem of this is the cost of repair is so much greater, even though the repair may be in a month, 2 months. But the cost is so much higher that it bites into everything. So I think that's the issue for the Russians, like so many people. And that's the issue we're seeing with cheap drones that manifests itself everywhere. You can do a lot of damage with a cheap drone that costs the other guy a fortune to fix it or takes out a ship or whatever. Well, that is a reality for Russia, that it costs them a lot of money. Now, the reality is now, because of the increase in the price of oil, they're making so much money. All of that is, out the window. But I do think that it's interesting that the Russians now are responding, saying, look, Finland and the Baltics, you guys keep screwing around and we're going to hit you with a couple of missiles. I think that is a response to internal pressure. I think that's a response from a lot of Russian people saying to the government, we're pissed, man. You're just going to let these people do anything in the world to us, and we're not even going to respond. So that is actually a response to internal pressure from angry Russian people, political. You see it on the news or what have you, where the people in Russia are pissed, and they, interestingly enough, they're angry at their government for being too dovish.
Yeah.
They're like, you need to hit those guys back. And the government's trying to like, but we don't want to make this war spread to other countries. So that's the conversation going on in Russia is people who are angry. They're saying these people did that, punch them in the mouth. And the government's like, we don't really want to spread it, but so much. So there's an interesting internal discussion going on in Russia. We're getting to a point where, what Russia did, they released a list of these companies that are building drones for Ukrainians and said, we might pulverize these countries. Well, here's the reality. They might, because they know good and well that if they flatten these factories in the Baltics and Finland, the U.S. ain't going to do it. First of all, the U.S. can't stand up. Trump hates these. The U.S., like a lot of these people, that the U.S. is not going to say, we're going to go to war for a Baltic state that has 1.4 million people. We're going to go to World War III. Not going to happen. Finland has 5.7. We're going to go to World War III for that. The U.S. is not going to do that. So even if they blast the crap out of them, which they may, I don't think they will. They're threatening. The U.S. is not going to respond militarily. They're not going to risk Chicago and New York getting nuked for Vilnius. That's not going to happen.
With respect to the giant oil fields argument, could that same argument be used, though, for what happened in the Middle East, where everybody was celebrating when the Iranians were punching back against the Gulf states and hitting these very large facilities with conventional munitions with relatively small payloads? Could that argument kind of work both ways in that the Iranian attacks that were very similar were not as effective as maybe people thought they were in terms of neutralizing those oil and gas installations?
I don't know because, for instance, you have Oman, who doesn't really get hit because they're like, okay, we're going to make some deals with the Iranians so we don't get hit at all. And then you have the UAE, who's been literally used some of their planes to attack Iran, and Iran's knocked the crap out of them. So I think you may be able to look at one country, Oman, and say they ain't been hit. And look at the UAE and say, man, 40% of their, I'm just going out a number. You know what I mean? So if we look at the Middle East as one whole, and just say from the perspective of out here, hey, oil's flowing out to everybody, or it ain't flowing out to everybody. That's how it affects the rest of the world and prices for us. Yes. But if you look at the various, I think what they have demonstrated is, hey, this is a country that's maybe helping out, attacking us, and maybe there's missiles coming off of their ground. We can hurt them really bad. And if you're that one country that's getting hurt real bad, you know what I mean? You got problems. So I think that's it. If you divvy it up into individual countries, some of them have been hurt far worse than others. And everybody knows the potential is there because of their long-range strike capability that they can take out anything in the Middle East they want to as far as any facilities, and there's nothing we can really do to stop them. So that threat hangs over our head 24 hours a day. And of course, it looms as the sword of Damocles, it looms over the negotiations.
Yeah, I guess there's just a bit of a contradiction there, because I always hear people minimize these attacks on Russian facilities. And you rightly point out that it can cost tens of millions of dollars to fix problems that are caused by a $5,000 drone. Well, the same kind of holds true for Iran. If they send a Shahed drone to one of these oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, it's not going to really significantly, lower the output of that facility unless they hit like a real critical artery of that facility, which is possible. So I find that, both sides kind of get into this situation where they overstate their gains and they minimize their losses, and nobody can really objectively kind of assess the situation for what it is. Do you find that in talking to people? Because I know you talk with a lot of people every day.
I agree with you. In that, in the same way that the Russians can get stuff going, it's just going to be costly. There are these other people for the most part and I think the Iranians intentionally that some of it is a symbolic hit. You know what I mean? We're going to do what we do. They have the same equipment. They know what it is. We're going to hit this area. Lots of smoke and fire will go up, and everybody will say, "My God, look what they did!" But they know it's repairable, right? And I think you know, and I know that if we really want to take them out, we know what we need to hit with our biggest missiles. So it's a reminder that they can if they really want to. But I agree with you. It's the same type of thing. They're not taking, so far, they're doing damage, but they're not taking out anything that can't be repaired. So that in the event that there is some kind of a deal, things can go back to some level of normalcy. So yes, there is some level of restraint being exercised here. And as the other part of it is this, from a strategic perspective, as long as you exercise some restraint, that still leaves an ace in your hand. Like they never closed the Bab al-Mandab Strait. But from a strategic perspective, you don't close it because that's an ace out there that you can always threaten to close it, right? Now, if in fact, as we hear, they've opened the Straits of Hormuz, that's more leverage now because you can always close it now. Once you open it, everybody's like, oh, thank God it's open again. Yes, and Trump, yeah, it's open again. And you just say, but don't forget, I can close it, but I won't as long as, we keep going, we're good. So, negotiations and all of this stuff is about leverage. What leverage do you have to make the other side bend a little bit? And I think some of this stuff we're looking at, how about this? Most of this stuff we're looking at, particularly with the Iranians, is leverage because when you are overall the weaker power, right? You're not a world power. Well, you are now, but traditionally you're not a world power in the same way Russia, China, the US. They operate on this sphere. Nobody else does. And when you're not in that sphere, you have to get any kind of leverage you can. Well, it sort of happens because of the part of the world that they're in. They got a lot of leverage. So they're building their leverage. I think they played their hand really, really well. And I think they didn't want to wipe out they didn't want to wipe out the oil capacity in the Middle East. They wanted to make it look like they did. They wanted to make it look like they could, which they can. And they wanted the threat of that to always be there. And that's smart. It's strategy. So I'm all this, and I say this. I'm a person who I want peace. I want a peaceful resolution to these things. Hopefully people will play their hands in a way that gets us a peaceful resolution, at least. For how long, we don't know. But, as you know, by the time we finish these conversations, all of this talk of a peaceful resolution and the U.S. could be bombing again, Israel could be attacking again. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Well, to add to the volatility of that, just yesterday, there was Iranian officials and Yemeni officials talking about a closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which was about to go into enforcement today. Which, it's crazy how you go from that to, but I guess this is brinkmanship. So
exactly. That's when you want to play that card. Things are on the edge. You're not sure. The other guy maybe says yes, maybe says no. What are we going to do? Quick, play an ace. What are we going to do? Let's say we may close the Bab el-Mandeb. Well, we might just close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Not saying we're going to, but it could happen. And the other guy says, all right, I'll sign. That's what I mean? That's the kind of brinkmanship. You're right. It's brinksmanship. They don't want to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They do not want to close it because power is only power until you use it. Then it becomes force. You don't want to use force. You want to use power. You want that hanging over there. You want to hold that Bab el-Mandeb card over their head till the cows go home. But you don't want to play it because once you play it, you don't have it anymore. So they don't want to close it. They want to continue to threaten to close it. And that, what they want to close it? I used to do sales. Well, they want to close it. They want to use that to close the deal. When you're in sales, ever heard of ABC always be closing? You want to close the deal? Just when it gets to the edge and the U.S. says, I'm not sure, you reach for that last card. Well, we got the Bab el-Mandeb Strait over here. Just say we could close the deal and guarantee. Okay, yeah, we'll do it. So it's a closing card.
Interesting.
And I'm rooting for peace. I'm rooting for peace, man. I'm rooting for people not to get killed. I'm rooting for, the betterment of man. It's a moral thing to me. Everybody involved. I want just people to be able to work and raise their families and make a living and enjoy their lives and go fishing and drive their pickup truck. Two things I like to do.
Well, let's hope good can prevail, and we got to remain vigilant, but always wise and incisive words, Garland. And Where can people find out more information above and beyond your YouTube channel about what you do?
You can, I'm on X, look for the THE Garland Nixon. Now you'll find at Garland Nixon, which I own, which I pay for, which has a blue check mark, but I'm not allowed to to access that account. So I got two accounts on X that I pay for as verified account. Both of them have blue check marks, but the only one I'm actually allowed to access is the THE Garland Nixon. And just look, I'm on Twitter look for me on, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Telegram. Just look for Garland Nixon. There's pretty much only one that I can find. There was another one in Ohio, but I think he died.
Okay. Well, always prolific too. And you interview, I think you did like 5 videos yesterday. You're really making me think I got to step my game up a bit here.
Well, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate the good work you guys do. Say excellent stuff. I love the prepper stuff, man. I used to think I used to be like, the prepper stuff is crazy. And it's like all of the rest of during COVID, I was like, those darn conspiracy theory people are nuts. And then after COVID, I was like, I think I'm becoming one of them.
Well, you've done a career in law enforcement, so you know how dangerous things can get.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for coming out. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Had a good time.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.